Hello, everyone. My name is David Morris. I'm the publisher of Lake Drive Books, where we publish books that help you heal, grow, and discover. And sometimes we publish satire, like with Becky Garrison, who I'm here with today, who is a longtime journalist, writer, satirist. I have no idea about all the other things. You must have so many other things going on. We've only talked so many times, but I do remember you from way back being a writer for the Wittenberg Door
Hmm.
and just having a blast looking at this at the things that you wrote and the great illustrations that went along with it. How are you doing today, Becky?
I'm doing actually pretty good. I'm here in the Greater Portland region, and we actually have sun today, which is a lovely day, start of spring. Woohoo.
Yeah, yeah, I'm in Michigan, so we're not quite there yet. Well, we just wanted to get together and talk about a special book project we've already accomplished together. We brought back your memoir, which is really a collection of essays called Jesus Died for This, which is pictured there right next to you.
Hmm.
Before we talk about that, though, what is Distilled in Washington? People are going to want to
Dis-
know.
Distilled in Washington, is the first book that covers the history of distilling in Washington. This is one of the interests that I've had when I moved up here to the Pacific Northwest. My interest was to begin to explore what I call the spirituality of the Pacific Northwest craft culture. So here, beer, wine, cider, spirits, it's a way for people to come together in community to celebrate the bounty of the Pacific Northwest. So it's not just going into a bar and getting drunk, but it's there to have your friends, to have I say it's kind of a cheers like experience. And this
Yeah.
is very prevalent here. There's a lot of alternative worship communities here, very strongly influenced by the Celtic community here and the culture of the where you can kind of separate this world from the next. Is just a lot of interesting explorations up here. You're seeing
Yeah.
so many interesting components here, and
I
as I
love
pitched,
that.
mm-hmm,
And that's not irrelevant to even getting to the writing that you're doing now. In fact, actually, last night here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, I went to a brewery. We have a lot of really good breweries here, a lot.
mm-hmm,
And it was kind of sparsely attended, but they had an open mic night guy with his guitar there and inviting people up. I sang a couple songs just like
mm-hmm.
that. That was community. It was a nice little moment and a great way to just get away from the cares of the day.
Well, see, once you get down to the grassroots, and that's what's very interesting here, is that because the Pacific Northwest is isolated from the Christian industrial complex, it's isolated from Wall
Mm.
Street, Madison Avenue. It's not a place that, basically, I kind of jokingly say that we're probably one of the last places that's going to get bombed. People aren't, we're not the place where things are supposedly, quote unquote, the place to be. And therefore, things just grow organically. In fact, if you try to become a bit too Hollywood, you try to get a little too uppity for yourself, you get laughed. I mean, Ryan Reynolds here has a distillery called Aviation Gin, and it is a joke. People laugh at it. At another place like New York or Los Angeles, it'd be like the hipster place, the thing to go to.
Yeah.
Here, people go, nah. That they want to hear more about where it comes from in the origins. You take a community like we have a Persian immigrant here, Momontazi, who came over here as a immigrant and has now formed this winery and vineyard, this Detmar organic biodynamic certified using the philosophical principles that were actually founded by Zoroaster that Rudolf Steiner developed with biodynamic principles, and just watching how much he gives back to the current immigrant community. And you find these kind of organic things just happening here all over the place. It's a very
Yeah.
exciting way to cover this kind of culture.
Yeah. That's very deep. So speaking of deep, we have a book about whiskey and a book about Jesus on the same screen here. That is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
So we brought this book back.
Mm-hmm.
This is a book that you wrote in 2010, I believe,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Called Jesus Died for This, a
Mm-hmm.
satirist search for the risen Christ. Um, Talk a little bit about why you wrote that book in the first place, and then let's get to why it's still relevant today.
Well, I was contacted by Zondervan. Apparently, they wanted to do a Mike Yaconelli 2.0. They thought that I was going to be the next hipster that was going to kind of do this without reading the room. If anyone would have actually looked at it, you would have realized that in order to do what Mike did, it can't be done in 20 by 2028,
Yeah.
2008, when I
And
was first
everybody should
approached.
go look up Mike Yaconelli. His name will be in the subtitles. Look this guy up. He's no longer
Yeah,
with us, but he was one amazing human being.
yeah, but that kind of book that he wrote, where you could be progressive, cutting edge, and edgy without really selling out, didn't exist by 2008. It was there was already that shift in Book Expo from being writer driven to being marketing driven. It was already clear that this writing was on the wall. I didn't know it at the time, but what I did is I just noticed in 2007 to 2008, starting with my trip to Israel and ending right before in Chicago, right before Obama got elected, that I had covered this weirdly weird series of pilgrims. I had been to Israel. I went to Jordan. I started going to Book Expo. I was covering some emergent church conferences, kind of like the last straw gas for that, and everything I did. I said, this
Book
is kind
Expo
of
is
a
the big book conference for was it the larger market or the Christian book conference?
oh no, I went to the I've never been to the Christian booksellers. I've always
Okay.
been to Book Expo. So kind of
Which has Christian sellers there too. That's also a pilgrimage of religion in a sense. That's
yeah.
true.
So I just noticed that by the end of the year, I said, I'm doing all these series of accidental, what I call accidental pilgrimages. It
Hmm.
wasn't a case of a publisher like with Eat, Pray, Love, or living in a tent for a year to pretend that you're living a year of living like a biblical woman. I wasn't doing anything that was driven by a financial marketing. I pitched it at the end of the tour. I said I just happened to notice as a writer that I had a really weird and quite interesting and wonderful year, and I thought it would be interesting to chronicle what I ended up doing as I was looking for Jesus. Because a lot of these places, I was not finding Jesus. I was finding a lot of missional marketing garbage, so to speak.
Products and gifts.
It was platform over prophecy, which is what they really wanted to do. And I think ultimately this was my last book. I did not know it at the time because I had signed a 2-book deal. But as my book was coming out, was when the whole Rob Bell fiasco happened. And I said, well, if Rob Bell is considered too liberal, which by the way, he really isn't. He was just brilliant at marketing himself that way. But if he is considered too liberal, there's no way that this is not tenable. I need to get the heck out of here. So
You
that
you
was
mean
kind
you
of
mean
the
people who
after.
satire Christianity are liberal?
Well, what I would say is that by the time the book came out, the Wittenberg door had closed,
Yeah,
which
yeah,
was really substantial. And this was the third publisher I'd had where the editor left the book before it was published.
yeah,
And so I had this history of, well, look, the editor keeps leaving the books as I'm being published. There's something going here. Maybe this is just not the right market. And almost as soon as I exited, then Sojourners had that lovely incident where they refused to run an ad from Believe Out Loud, which
yeah.
is a very innocuous ad. It was just a lesbian couple coming in with a kid who wanted to go to church, and the pastor said, welcome. That was it. But that was a bridge too far for Sojourners because they don't want to alienate their conservative funders.
Right, right. That is a bridge too far for so many organizations.
Yeah.
They don't want to
And
alienate, and then they think that that's okay to just stop right there. Yeah,
And unfortunately, Ryan McLaren, Nutty Bolts Weber, and the other God's Politics blogs contributors did not stand up. They just said, well, I kind of regret that it happened, but let's try to build bridges and blah, blah, blah. And I was the
yeah,
one who blasted them, found myself off the masthead. And within a few years, I realized I need to move elsewhere to discover where I'm going to go for the rest of my life.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it ended up being the Pacific Northwest, which was the exact right place where my soul needed to heal from all of this.
yeah. Wonderful. Well said. So, okay, so as we've reintroduced Jesus died for this, you have talked about how uh, that when this book came out, it's sort of a retrospective on the moment that Christianity in the United States died. I don't know
Mhm.
if I said that the way you say it, but say more about that.
Well, I mean, I said, to paraphrase Don McLean, this was the day the music died. I didn't know it at the time, but I had started with my previous book, The New Atheist Crusaders. I began to meet some humanist collectives and discovering that a lot of people were finding community to quote Greg Epstein, good without God.
The
And
humanist chaplain at Harvard, right? Greg
yes,
Epstein.
but he's now the chaplain period at Harvard. He is now, so Harvard has the first humanist chaplain as their
Correct.
full chaplain. He's not a subheading anymore. He's the chaplain. And he's part of my book because I got to connect with him and his work, and just seeing how everyone was starting to leave. The poll numbers were starting to show that the nuns were starting to rise. I could see the young adults. By the time this book came out, over 50% of young adults under 18 grew up with no religion.
And that's the nuns, Nones. A lot of folks
Yes,
still
I
don't know
mean,
about that.
it wasn't a case of I'm tired, I'm done with this toxic religion. I don't like it. They were raised with no religion, but yet
Hmm.
they would have had spiritual values. So there was something going on. And when I covered this for those who are interested in looking at church history and looking to document it, this was the year that everything went away. 2008 really was. Obama was the first president elected who actually acknowledged atheists exist during his national prayer breakfast. It became clear to me that a lot of the things I observed in Jesus Died for This have since turned toxic. I mean, there are people there that I thought were warriors along the way. I've now had this knowledge into understanding spiritual narcissism, understanding religious trauma, understanding church too. And all of those factors together made me realize that I covered, which you might want to say, the fall of Rome. I did not intend to do that. I did not think I was doing it at the time. And
Hmm.
the research wasn't there to support anything I was finding.
Yep. Yep.
But now I understand why I was so frustrated. I mean, I see this line of frustration throughout my book. Why did this happen? Why are people not paying attention? Why is all this happening? And I now understand why, because basically I was looking to a universe that was basically inhabited by extreme people with extreme narcissistic tendencies. They lacked empathy. They lacked
Yep.
compassion. They were
And
more concerned with their platform than the prophecy.
yeah.
And I didn't know it at the time. And it's not a matter of being naive. It's a matter of the research not being there.
Yeah. I think too, like I definitely think that in around 2010, a lot of Christian culture had really uh, peaked at that point. Christian infrastructure, the Christian industrial complex. You had the 90s was like the rise of a lot of in the Christian book business. It was the rise of a lot of Christian bookstores. They got really big, and then Amazon came along around 2010, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of that changed. That was the rise of the mega churches at that
Mm-hmm.
time. Yeah, there was a lot of change, and a lot has happened since then too. Why do you think Jesus died for this is still relevant today, um, as just maybe a read inherently in and of itself?
I think it's interesting for people to, I frame it from as a pilgrimage. I was talking about my friend Kurt Nielsen gave me some advice on how to do a pilgrimage. And I think I would encourage people to begin to do a pilgrimage into their own spiritual journey. Where is your own life taking you? What are the spiritual pinpoints you can see? And you look back at your life in retrospect, like, for example, if you journal for a year, journal for 5 years, look back. Where have you grown? What can you learn from this? Where are the touch points? I went to 2007, went to Israel for the first time. I don't know if I'll ever get to go back. That was
Mhm.
the one. It was making fun of. I went to Jordan, and I've been there both to Israel and Jordan. I've been there twice again since then. But
Mm.
just watching what I observed then versus what I see now, and there's a lot we can learn from history. We're in a period. I point this out in my forthcoming book, Gaslighting for God. We're in a period that Margaret Wheatley describes the age of decadence.
Mm.
I had not read her work when Jesus Died for This. I don't even think it had even come out. But in reading her work, I begin to see we are covering the collapse of a civilization cycle and the emergence of another. And in order not to repeat the same mistakes, it's helpful for us to know
Mm.
where we've been.
Hmm.
And I think, I look back at my trips to Israel and Jordan. I try not to cry. It was, that's very tragic, but I'm just kind of thinking that was a period. I don't know if that'll ever be repeated. History does repeat itself. I was
Try
in
try not to
Wittenberg.
cry. Try not to cry because that
Well,
Israel and Jordan's not there anymore.
well,
Or
it's just looking at all the there was this potential. I believe that there was a potential that does not
Mhm.
exist anymore.
Right,
And
Right.
Where do we go from this? And part of this is understanding the fact that we're in an age of decadence keeps me from going crazy, because I realize things are being destroyed and new things are being rebuilt.
Right.
And this was the last, I think 2008, 2010 was when we last thought that institutions might be able to save us.
Right. Right.
And, maybe we could go through and everything must change to her. Maybe that will change. There was that hope that
Yeah.
if we go to the right
There was
conferences,
there was in that 2010 time, there was this hope that things might
yeah,
change.
there was this
Yeah.
thing, if all we have to do is redo a new church. But see, concurrent with doing Jesus Died for This, I penned 3 books for church publishing on this dynamic UK European form of what I call emerging church, which was very much at the grassroots level. And it was happening with a few congregations and a few groups here in the United States, starting to trickle over. And the hope was, if we pen these 3 books, we will educate the institution, and the institution will see what's happening in the UK, and they'll be so excited they'll want to adopt it.
Yeah.
And I think that's
Yeah.
basically what Jesus Died for This. It shows people we thought this could happen. So don't reinvent the wheel. Don't run around and think that it's going to be changed at the
Yeah.
institutional level.
But that
Because
and sort of that was the hope you were when you say your search for the risen Christ, that was the hope that you saw then.
yes, because
Oh,
when you would see people, like I saw
yeah.
this lovely community, St. Hildegard community, this lovely group of women that were just all together. And the bishop was so conservative that he would not allow for a lesbian ordained Episcopal priest to administer communion. For example, you would find all of a sudden these communities trying so hard, and then the institution would just go, eh. Now, a few instances the institution was right. There are a few people who were renegades, who were outlaws, who should never have been ordained.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying the institution is always wrong, but in these cases, what I was noticing with these 3 books is, instead of promoting, I mean, it takes more work to promote grassroots, and you're not going to get
Yeah.
the same return. You're not going to get the same investment back.
Right. It's not as easy. Yep.
You charge $99 for, let's say, a weekend of conversation. You're not going to get the same crowd as when you charge $350 to give the latest holy hipster the
Yeah.
platform.
Yeah.
People want to go here and see the bling.
Or
That's
the latest social media marketing guru.
so. But when this church publishing made a decision that they would rather promote the big names versus try to expand the grassroots community, I just left devastated.
Yeah.
That was, Jesus Died for This. My editor left. So there's always this interest of, you can be as edgy as you want to be, but then there's this point at which you must stop, because
Right.
you might impact your sales.
Right.
Like, I'm thinking back to, this is around the time Jesus came out, when Mark Driscoll and Rachel Held Evans were battling over, they both were about to have bestsellers released by Thomas Nelson. And if you recall, they both started having these fights. Ooh, bad, whatever, just arguing over their different theology. All of a sudden, it just stopped. And you knew damn right well, anybody with a brainstem could have figured out, which unfortunately a lot of people didn't seem to have at the time, that their publicist called them and said, stop. Because it just all of a sudden, and you could just tell, you saw these fake manufactured, blog words. When my book, Jesus Died for This came out, that was when Rob Bell did the most brilliant marketing move, did an e-blast to everybody. And then most of them were smart enough not to buy, but John Piper bit and went, goodbye, Rob Bell. Next thing you know, he's on the cover of Time 100. And then I saw Rob Bell at his book launch, and I was kind of hoping, I brought some Jesus Died for This cards. Thought if I met people, I might chat it up a little bit. And I saw young kids desperately asking him, as a pastor, he's not pastoring a church right now, but would you ordain me? Would you marry me and my boyfriend or my girlfriend? And he just looked at me and gave me this, well, I'd like to affirm everybody. And I just was like, it's over. You had people who were people of faith, who desperately wanted to know from a pastor who claims to be liberal, will you love me? Will you let me have the same rights, rights, and rights, rates, as other people? And the church's answer was no. And then you would see the very liberal people on the liberal end saying anything goes. They began saying, I have a legal wife. but I also have a spiritual wife.
Hmm.
And you're like, even in the most progressive, polyamory type settings, that's considered cheating because
Hmm.
it's not consent of all parties. Your legal wife did not consent for you to have your spiritual wife. And then people started discussing sex as though it wasn't with any spirituality, wasn't with any intent encountered. It was basically shameless. It was basically, saying anything goes, whatever I
Yeah.
want to do. It's perfectly. So there wasn't anything of like a guided ethical guides. It was just everybody trying to say the most outrageous thing that could get them clicks and whatnot. So in the end, I left the Jesus Died for This with hope. The hope has now been translated into I do believe we can create spiritual grassroots communities. I'm finding this in the Pacific Northwest. I believe it can happen elsewhere, but people do need to get in touch with and deal with the fact of why are they so attracted to all these spiritual shit shows?
Yeah.
What is the
Yeah.
attraction do you have? And once you can figure that out, and I was guilty too. I mean, I would be like, I would have FOMO. I mean, if I didn't get invited to a certain media event, I would feel
Sure. Sure.
absolutely. Now I don't give a care. I just don't. I'm going to go where I want to go. You want me, fine. You don't want me,
Yeah.
fine. Because I'm in a much healthier spiritual space. And the challenge now is to get people into that spiritual space. But first, to go there, Jesus Died for This will give you the history so you can see where the institution has completely fallen apart. I mean,
Good.
absolutely, completely. I do not, but we're looking at new models. We're looking at, Lake Drive Books, you're doing a different model than what the big five traditional four, where I'm not
Right.
required to be a dancing pony or do these kind of absolutely ridiculous things that people have to do in order to sell their books.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Becky, for filling us in on Jesus Died for This. I really do encourage people to pick it up. It's a fun read too. And there's pictures, actually.
Yeah.
You can see them in the excerpts online. And thank you very much for working with us to bring it back. And
Mhm.
we're looking forward to more from you, and maybe even that Distilled in Washington book. I think you don't have to live in Washington to enjoy it. So I would
Mhm.
guess. But thank you,
No, you
Becky.
don't.